firstly going to ask Erik Berglund to address you. He is from the Alternativ för Sverige party, which is the new nationalist party in Sweden, which was launched at the beginning of 2018. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Erik to speak to you, and he'll be followed by Gustav Kasselstrand, who is the co-founder of the party. And so without any further ado, I'm just going to hand you over to them. Thank you very much.
Well, my name is, just like you said, Erik Berglund, and can I begin by expressing my gratitude for the invitation and for your hospitality. This truly is a magnificent hotel, and it's an honor to be able to address you today. I'm not going to speak about Brexit, but I'd like to mention briefly that as I watch the abuse that you patriots take for standing up for your freedom and your country, I am reminded of that story about the first Irishman that came to America. And as he walked across the streets of New York, he became witness to a street fight. And he walked over and he said, "Is this a private brawl or can anyone join?" That's how I feel. I'd really love to jump in and join you, but I feel like, just like it's up to us Swedes to save Sweden, it is your fight for Britain, and I am confident you will win it. Rest assured, you will win that fight. And I also believe that Brexit is going to be a success, a great success, but it's also going to be followed by much greater issues which you have to handle regarding who is going to live in Britain onward and so on and so forth. So I think the gods are smiling upon you, and as it might be tough right now, you will be successful just like we will be in Sweden. Now, I think Enoch Powell began his famous speech with a quote: "The supreme function of statesmanship is to provide against preventable evils." And I think we can all agree that not very much was prevented over the last 80 years. We're in a big mess, and it's time for something new, for new leaders to take us all out of this mess. For it is basically the same mess all over the Western world. We share a history, and we share today's present history, and we will share whatever fate we choose. And I cannot stress enough that I think we must choose our fate. Our fate will not be thrown upon us by anyone but ourselves. And that's why I'm so optimistic, even if times right now are tough. And it was 10 years ago I got to know Gustav Kasselstrand, who's going to address you after me. And what began with a conversation evolved into a podcast with over 130 episodes and millions of listenings. And that evolved into a party which is now called Alternativ för Sverige. And my background is in the Conservative Party. And Gustav's background is in the still somewhat conservative party, the Sweden Democrats. But unfortunately, we both became increasingly frustrated over 10 years ago with the simple fact that we play the same leftist game of defense which we are bound to lose. That strategy has never worked anywhere in the Western world for any country or for anyone who believes in our cause of freedom and of prosperous free nation states. And so we were increasingly frustrated and tired of this. And since I had lived in Austria for quite a few years, I was inspired by their Freedom Party, which is somewhat to the left of where I'm standing in economic terms, but they have a very brash and fresh approach to Marxism, which is it's evil and we have to fight it every day, and there can be no compromise whatsoever. So whereas I left the Conservative Party 10 years ago, Gustav left the Sweden Democrats roughly 5 years ago. And it was to bring this new and fresh offensive spirit for a new force, which we believed was the way forward to take back our country for the Swedish people, because that is the main thing we're about. Sweden belongs to the Swedish people, not to anybody else, and certainly not to the European Union. We too applaud Brexit, and we say now it's time for Swexit. And we have embarked on a very successful journey. We have had the chance of taking part in 2 elections. And in the first one, we won 20,000 votes, even though we were ignored by the media from day one. And we managed to win just as many votes in the European election this year, which meant that we increased our vote, as if you look upon it as a percentage. And so, without further ado, I would like to give way to Gustav, but I would like to end with this quote, which I picked up from the Conservative Political Action Conference in America, where Ralph Reed said the following about the new attitude that has to be the mantra for everybody who believes in our righteous cause. And he said, "We have a message for those so-called profiles in cowardice who lack the courage to stand and fight. We're tired of those who cave under pressure from the liberal left and the media and always fail to oppose their agenda. And the message is for those who display the backbone of a chocolate delay, who cave the moment they criticize, that we are really done following you. We are done following those who counsel the cold seduction of surrender. We will not follow you anymore. We are sick and tired of those who offer capitulation masquerading as compromise. We will not follow you any longer. From this day and beyond, we are no longer going to follow lukewarm so-called leaders anymore. They have their God is their ambition, their idol is power, and they seek only the approval of the people who oppose every one of our core values. We must stop believing that these people stand for anything that is good for us and our cause. And they will never ever soil their hands with the sacred stuff of principle. We are done following you. And that is my main message. We must start opposing fake conservatives wherever they show up. We must say to them, you are not a leader, you are just a guy taking a walk. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erik, and thank you for inviting me and my colleagues here to London. It's a great honor for us to be present here. It's in fact the first time I ever visit England in a political content. Of course, I've been here several times before, but I waited for so many years for this first invitation to visit this great nation and address a current political issue, not only Brexit, of course, but also the population replacement that our countries are battling today, and that England, Sweden and many other European nations are in the middle of fighting. As a nationalist and a traditionalist, it's easy for me to feel empathy and sympathy for the situation that Britain is currently in, or Germany, or France, or Poland, or any other European nation. It's very easy for me, it's natural for me to feel this identity with other nations as a Swedish nationalist. The only ones who cannot feel anything with their common friends in Europe, who cannot feel any identity, who do not feel any understanding of the situation that we're battling, it's in fact the globalists. They claim to be global, they claim to be international, but they do not care whatsoever about the struggle that different European peoples are fighting. It's the nationalists who can feel this empathy and sympathy, because we feel and we know that the situation in Britain is very similar to the situation in Sweden or Germany or any other nation who is battling this problem with cultural Marxism, population replacement, political correctness, uncontrolled immigration. All these problems, they are similar all over Western Europe, and we are having a common cause fighting it together. This is my message today. This is my message, that I'm not here to bring problems. You have enough of problems here in England. I feel you. You have enough problems with population replacement and political correctness. I'm sure you have. And I'm not here to talk for half an hour about all the problems that I have, because you have enough burden to carry. But I'm here to send a message of hope from my country, from Sweden. And despite the fact that Mr. Lord Frost is completely right, that Sweden is in fact a suicide nation, despite the fact that it is true, then it's also true that we have a stronger and stronger opposition growing in the left-wing extreme country of Sweden. We have a strong opposition that has learned from the mistakes that it has committed from the previous decades. And it's an opposition that is now gaining a stronger and stronger self-confidence in battling the globalists that have taken over Sweden, England, and many other countries. I'm here to send a message of hope, that Sweden is not done and over. Sweden is fighting, and we are fighting stronger and better than ever before. So yes, it's true, and I recall that Powell said in his famous Rivers of Blood speech that it's like watching a nation busily engaged in heating up its own funeral pyre. And it's exactly the feeling I have when I see my own country, Sweden, and how the population is being replaced by immigrants from mainly Africa and the Middle East. But it's not the only Sweden that's out there for you. It's not only a suicide nation. Yes, it's true that we're battling immigration, and it's not only about immigration, it's also about the gender madness. It's about the crushing of the family as an institution. It's about political correctness. I've been reported by the police, I'm sure, 5 times since I launched the party of Alternativ for Sweden. They reported me for hate speech, they reported me for violating the security rules, they reported me for everything in trying to crush me.
Good for you.
It was good for me. And I said that to them. I take it as a compliment that you are indeed reporting me. You're not reporting rapists or murderers or immigrants or criminals, but you're reporting me for trying to use my right of freedom of speech in my own country. Thank you for telling everyone that this one is indeed an opposition politician in his own country. So I just thank them all the time. So it is indeed true that we are battling the political correctness, just as you are. But this very extreme situation of Sweden has also created a resistance that is strong. And we have learned a lot from our previous mistakes. Because as an opposition politician or an opinion maker or whatever you're spending your time with fighting for your nation, there's many different ways to fight for your nation. But if you do this in a very extreme country such as Sweden, then you develop certain skills and you develop an attitude that tells everyone and that signals to everyone that this is not an easy opposition to battle. Rather, we are growing in self-confidence and we're finding new methods for our opposition work in Sweden. But let me go back to the beginning of this decade to explain what has happened in my country, and both the success but also the mistakes that has been made in the country and that we are trying to learn from. I was before a member of the Sweden Democrats. I'm sure you all heard about the Sweden Democrats, and they've grown quite a lot. They are the 3rd biggest party in Sweden. But let me go back to year 2010. I was then a member in the Sweden Democrats. They were widely seen as an opposition party. They were bullied by everyone. They were hated among the establishment. It was indeed a party that no one wanted anything to do with, which was, of course, a very good sign of quality of this party. It meant that they were indeed battling or trying to battle the establishment. So they were hated among everyone in the establishment. And that's why I joined them, because I'm a rebel. So of course I finally felt that there is indeed a party, even in Sweden, that I can identify with. And I was a member of the Sweden Democrats for 4 or 5 years before they even entered parliament. I've been an activist. I've done all the hard work in that sense as well. And then after they entered the parliament, I was getting more and more positions, and I was eventually also the chairman of the youth organization on a national level. But in 2010, Sweden was already, of course, facing the immigration problems and the replacement in our towns and cities. And the Sweden Democrats entered the parliament. So it was the first time in Sweden that a real anti-immigration party took place in the parliament. Many of the sympathizers to the Sweden Democrats thought that finally Sweden is turning normal again and they will adjust to our policies, and we have seen the worst days now behind us. Now the future lies before us. But what happened was that the bullying just continued of the Sweden Democrats. They went into the parliament, and I could see the party who had an idea of being an opposition, of having self-confidence, of not playing the game that the liberals and the left wing set up for you, but rather doing things in their own way. I could see this party changing quite fast, actually. And within a few years' time, I could see that, well, what we thought or hoped would happen, namely that the other parties would adjust to the Sweden Democrats, it actually turned out the opposite. It was only the Sweden Democrats who adjusted to the other parties. And I could feel that this whole sense of being in opposition had vanished in a few years' time. I'm not here to talk about the history and complain about the Sweden Democrats, because I've been a member of them for many years as well. But it's important to understand this fact, and that's why I emphasize it, that in the beginning of this decade, in the middle of this decade, in 2015, the Sweden Democrats had fought so hard to become accepted among the establishment that they even threw out the whole youth organization, 5,000 members that we built up for many years of hard work. And we had actually built up a youth organization with confidence and with a real opposition idea. But we were thrown out to the Sweden Democrats. It was a very complicated story. It's also about balance of power and everything. I'm not here to address this in detail. But this is a very interesting moment in Swedish nationalism, traditionalism. Because in the middle of this decade, hundreds of thousands of Swedes could see that only relying on the Sweden Democrats to solve the problems will not be enough. So what we started to do was questioning this idea of surrender to the established political left-wing and mainstream parties. And we were trying to seek new ways of doing our oppositionary work. And this took place in many different ways, such as becoming independent opinion makers, launching podcasts, launching networks, getting together in different groups to discuss the current situation of Sweden. It was actually, despite the event that many people found rather depressing, that, okay, the Sweden Democrats have changed and so on, it was also the birth of a new movement in Sweden. And it's not only one movement, but rather several movements that are questioning this idea of surrender. So since 2015, the Swedish opposition has become stronger and stronger, and we're fighting on many different grounds with different weapons against the establishment. And it was also time for me, when I left the Sweden Democrats, to question what I had learned in the party and what I had learned from the so-called experts on how to do politics. So I was questioning a lot of the rules that they set up for you. And I was instead trying to attack ideas and going on an attack against the establishment. And it was also two different events at this time that made us having fuel on this, so to say. We were realizing that the era of surrender is over, and it was Brexit and Donald Trump's win in the American presidential election. And these two events caused us to identify that we believe that in Sweden there would also be place for a movement of opposition politicians or opinion makers who have this self-consciousness and who do not back down on political correctness, because we believe that this is the only way to create change in our country. So in 2018, we finally launched Alternativ for Sweden as a new political party, 6 months before the election in September in 2018. And we were, at the same day that we made the party public, we were declaring that the era of political correctness is over. The era of just pointing at problems but never presenting any solutions is also over. So we were, during the first day and in my speech, saying that Sweden needs an active repatriation policy of at least 500,000 immigrants. And today might be 1 million immigrants to go back to their countries. If this is not addressed, if this action is not taken, we will have no future whatsoever. You can stop all immigration today in Sweden or England or Germany or France. And that would just mean that you preserve all the problems that you have today. And with their increased nativity levels, the problem would just increase every day, day by day, in towns and cities all over Europe. So just stopping immigration is not a solution. Of course you need to do that as well, but you need to combine this with an active repatriation policy. And this is what I said from the first day in Alternativ for Sweden, that we're here to finally present solutions on the problems that Sweden is battling. We're not here to just try to play a blame game. Of course we can address who is responsible and why did it happen and so on, and there will be many theories on exactly what guilt would be on the media and the politicians and the globalists and so on. But we need also an idea of presenting alternatives that the population can address and understand. And this alternative, this proposal of repatriation, or in Sweden, återvandring, the sending back of immigrants, we did address that from the first day. And we said that this is a discussion that we will have to have, exactly who is going to have to return and who can stay. And we have addressed this issue by presenting calculations, ideas of different groups who need to go back to their countries. This is a solution to virtually all the problems that we are battling today. Without any repatriation or any sending back, and it has to be, of course, mandatory, not only voluntarily, because many of them do not want to return. Of course, it's good if they return voluntarily, but if they do not, we will help them to return in other ways. And I finally felt, when I had this speech in the winter or spring of 2018, that finally I'm able to say exactly what I think. I'm able to present exactly those solutions that I firmly believe in. No one holds me back anymore. I can say exactly what I believe is the solution. And I've been thinking about this for so many years that I know that this is the only solution, and anyone with a brain can understand that this is the only solution. So I wanted to show directly that the idea and the era of surrender is over, and we are not indeed just talking about, oh, we have to stop this era of political correctness and surrendering, but we are indeed also leading by example, and from the first day being the change that we want to see in Sweden and in Europe. Within a few weeks' time, we had 3 members of parliament from my previous party, the Sweden Democrats, joining us. And it was, of course, big controversy that they joined the new party of Alternativ for Sweden. It meant that we had some kind of de facto representation in the Swedish parliament during this election process. 3 members of parliament that showed also in the parliament how we would work if we all went into the parliament after the election. And they were taking the debates with the ministers of Sweden, asking them about the population replacement, confronting them in ways that no other politicians had ever done in the Swedish parliament, not even the Sweden Democrats when they came in 2010. So I would say that we did more for the Swedish opinion, the patriotic opinion of Sweden. We did more for that in just a few months' time than many other parties have done for years. So we show that it is indeed possible to move the whole political agenda in favor of your own stance. And this is exactly what we did. We toured all over Sweden, from south to the very north, the west, the east, everywhere in Sweden, to spread our message of repatriation, of a future for Sweden built on common sense. We were in towns, rural towns, cities, major cities. We were everywhere. We were trying to unite Sweden on this very great cause that we are presenting, this great solution for our country. We're not trying to divide Swedes. We're trying to unite them against the globalists and against the political establishment. We're trying to unite different political groups who could perhaps not agree on everything, but who could agree on the only important issue facing us, namely to stop the population replacement. This we must all be able to unite upon. So this is what we did. And in the election, we gained more than 20,000 votes. It was a number that many had hoped would have been higher. We had 0.3%. So of course we would have liked a higher result. But comparing it to the Sweden Democrats, it took them 12 or 14 years to gain 0.3% in Sweden. We gained it in half a year. So it meant that we were actually growing rapidly compared to many other alternatives of Sweden. So if you know your history, you also know that you have to compare this result with other results from the history. In the coming election, after the parliamentary election, the European election, we were the only party to address the Swedish Swexit. And we were the only party to even talk about the problems of the European Union and the forced upon ruling our country. We increased, as Erik said, to 0.5% in that election and had around 20,000 votes again. And we could see in that election that many voters were staying at home, but also many new voters were coming from the Sweden Democrats. So having this idea of seed and harvest actually showed that what we had in 2018, we were harvesting in 2019. So that's a short introduction of my experience of Swedish patriotism, of the mistakes that have been made, of the solution that we're trying to present. And since I joined this movement in 2006, I spent around 15 years fighting for Sweden in different ways. And what I learned during this time is that the old strategies have not worked. I'm very well aware that the traditional Britain group has the same idea that failing strategies must be abandoned. And I want to go through a few points that I want to emphasize a bit further. And if you agree with me, please tell me, and if you don't agree with me, please have a chat with me as well and explain why I might be wrong. But the first point that I have learned during this time is that we need to present solutions. No one likes a pessimist, no one likes a naysayer who just complains about all the problems that we have and that we want indeed the problems to never have occurred in our great countries and just turning the time back to the 1960s. Well, we cannot do exactly just that, but we can find inspiration from this time and we can present solutions that would create a new society which would indeed resemble that of the 1950s or the 1960s or whatever time you want to go back to. But you have to do it in modern ways and you have to present solutions to get there. Because no one likes someone who only complains about everything all the time. It's good to address also the problems, of course. Without understanding the problems, you will never be able to present solutions. So I'm not just saying that we should ignore the problems. We're well aware about the problems. But if you have understood the problems, then it's easy to present solutions. And usually what brings people back from presenting or discussing solutions is the fact that political correctness have killed common sense in Europe. Because many people understand the problems, and many people will speak about the problems when you have a chat with them at home or at the workplace, but they will not be able to address it in public. And this is one of the major problems, that we have not dared to speak solutions. So my second point is that you have to ignore the different name calling or whatever they will do to silence you. And in Britain you have this saying that you tell your children, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? I hope you still tell your children exactly those words, despite them being very politically incorrect today, when words will always hurt me in Europe, and I'm sure in Britain as well. But this is exactly the kind of attitude I try to have in my political work, that I try to use the name calling as compliments. When the police have reported me, I try to gain strength by it. I understand that they are trying to do name calling against me because they fear my message, and that indeed I present obviously some kind of opposition towards them, otherwise they wouldn't have spent any time on me. So this idea of giving people power just because they tell you that you are something, it means that you lack the power and you lack the self-consciousness, and you give it away to someone else who is indeed your enemy, and put him or her in control of your own emotions, which means that you are always 1 second away from getting a mental breakdown or something just because someone called you racist or a fascist. Who cares if the price is being called racist or fascist? If that's the price of saving Sweden, Britain and Europe, I'm happy to pay that price every day. Another point that I addressed before is that we need to attack the establishment, not the people. We might be frustrated, but we must never address this frustration towards our own people. And sometimes I hear that, yeah, but the Swedish people voted for this, they want this. So now they can get it, the rapes and the criminal immigrants and the population replacements. We must never fall into this decadence of attacking your own people. We must always attack the establishment and the globalists. And we must unite our people, the rural towns, the cities, the old people, the young people. They must be united. That's nationalism and patriotism in essence. And it's the only ones who are winning when we attack our own people are the globalists. They are the ones who are winning, and they want us to do that. So we must always be very careful not to address our own people. We have to make it easy to sympathize with our message, and you don't do that by calling other people idiots and you want this and you want your children to live in schools with only immigrants, you want your children to fear crime and so on. It's not a way forward for us, so we have to present solutions for them as well. My fourth rule is to not accept the rules. You have to question mainstream politics and the experts. Find new platforms, present new rhetoric that perhaps is not seen as politically correct. Make sure you don't play the game because it's set up with their rules to make you lose. My fifth example is to lead by example. I mean, if you say that political correctness is a problem, then you must show that you are not playing again with these rules. I'm so tough, I'm politically incorrect and so on. And then when you actually face a situation, when you have the opportunity to be politically correct or politically incorrect, most conservatives, so-called conservatives, always choose the way of being politically correct. And yet they complain about political correctness have gone mad. But they also need to understand that change comes from us. If we do not dare to be politically incorrect, no one else will either. So we must make sure to be this change that we want to see in our countries. Show leadership. My next point is to be long-term. when we have this fight that we have done for decades in our countries, we always, with a short-term perspective, have reasons to quit. And I heard many people say in 2018 that 2018 will be the last chance to save Sweden. If we don't save Sweden at this time, it's over. Okay, and we didn't save Sweden in 2018, so what? Are we giving up now? Just saying, take it, do what you want with it. Never. 2018 was the first chance to save Sweden, and we will continue forever and ever to try to save Sweden. Even if we're a minority in our own country, which we might be one day, we will continue this struggle. It will be more difficult, but we will always continue to fight for our countries, despite how dark and depressing the situation will ever look. Surrender is not an option.
Yeah.
To summarize all these points, these ideas that I presented, it has created an opposition in Sweden that, while seeing that Sweden is facing major problems, and the immigration is just continuing, 100,000 immigrants every year in a small country as Sweden, population replacement by immigration, political correctness, the problems are just increasing all the time when you look at the immigration, for example, and the Sweden Democrats have failed utterly in addressing this. But at the same time, as the problems are increasing, we can also see that the opposition of Sweden has gained self-confidence. And I believe that what we did in Alternativ for Sweden during the last year and during this year has given people a sense of hope, a sense of gratitude that there is indeed a movement in Sweden that are fighting for the Swedes and who won't back down because of political correctness. We want to lead by example, and we can see also today that we are harvesting the seeds. Our expression of repatriation, återvandring, is today coming into also the mainstream debate. Many people are presenting this as a possible solution. And I believe if it wouldn't have been for Alternativ for Sweden, this expression would have been nowhere in the established media or the established parties. And we can see now slowly, all the time, people are more and more thinking about repatriation, even among those who wouldn't call themselves even patriots. But this idea is irresistible for anyone with a common sense. And I believe that as we now enter a new decade in a few months' time, you will see a Sweden with, of course, the horror stories that have been mentioned, but also with an opposition that can be an example for many other countries. And I want to inspire you. I don't want to come here to complain. I want to tell you that while seeing all these problems, I have never before felt such a big hope and optimism for my beloved Sweden as today, as this year. Never ever before. This feeling of something being possible for us, this feeling of something that matters, that your contribution matters, this feeling is what I wanted to present to the Swedish people. And I am sure that Alternativ for Sweden and like-minded parties all over Europe will gain by having this attitude of winning, attitude of no surrender, and attitude of always fighting for your nation despite the price you have to pay for it. Thank you so much.